Freud's unconscious mind, how your past controls your present. The mind is like an iceberg. It floats with 1/7 of its bulk above water. Quick question. Why do you keep making the same mistakes in relationships, even though you consciously know better? You've probably had the experience of swearing you'll never date someone like your ex again, then finding yourself 3 months later with someone who pushes the exact same buttons in the exact same ways. Or promising yourself you'll be more assertive at work, then immediately falling back into the same people-pleasing patterns that frustrate you. You make conscious decisions to change, but something invisible keeps pulling you back into familiar patterns that don't serve you. Sigmund Freud identified what that invisible force is: your unconscious mind, programmed by experiences you can barely remember, running scripts you never consciously chose, controlling your adult behavior in ways you don't recognize. Right now, you probably think you're in charge of your choices. You believe you're a rational adult, making conscious decisions based on current circumstances and mature judgment. But Freud discovered something that will disturb you. Most of your behavior is controlled by psychological patterns that were established before you turned 7 years old, operating below your conscious awareness, driving you to recreate childhood dynamics even when they're destroying your adult life. Think about your romantic relationships. Do you find yourself attracted to people who are emotionally unavailable, just like one of your parents was? Do you end up in the same conflicts, playing the same roles, feeling the same frustrations you felt as a child? Think about your work patterns. Do you rebel against authority figures the way you rebelled against your parents? Do you seek approval from bosses the way you sought approval from caregivers? Do you handle stress, conflict, and responsibility using strategies you developed as a child? Think about your self-destructive habits, the procrastination, the self-sabotage, the ways you punish yourself when things go well. Where did you learn these patterns? Who taught you that you don't deserve success, love, or happiness? Freud's revolutionary insight was that your childhood doesn't just influence your adult personality. It programs your unconscious mind with templates for how relationships work, what you deserve, how to handle conflict, and what feels normal versus what feels dangerous. These templates operate automatically beneath your conscious awareness, making your adult choices feel like free will when they're actually compulsive repetitions of childhood patterns. The person who was neglected as a child unconsciously seeks partners who will neglect them, because neglect feels familiar and familiarity feels like love. The person who was criticized constantly as a child becomes a perfectionist who criticizes themselves more harshly than anyone else ever could. You're not choosing these patterns consciously. You're not even aware they're patterns. You think you're responding to current situations, but you're actually responding to ancient psychological programs that were installed when you were too young to understand what was happening. The puppet master pulling your strings isn't malicious. It's your own unconscious mind, trying to protect you using strategies that worked when you were 5, but are destroying your life now that you're 30. Part 2. The unconscious mind that's secretly running the show. Here's something that'll explain every confusing thing you've ever done. Freud discovered that your mind is like an iceberg, with most of its mass hidden underwater where you can't see it, but it controls everything above the surface. Your conscious mind, the part you think of as you, is actually the smallest part of your psychological system. It's the tip of the iceberg, visible and articulate, but not actually in charge of your behavior. Below consciousness is what Freud called the pre-conscious. Memories, thoughts, and feelings that aren't currently in your awareness, but can be accessed if you focus on them. These are things you know, but aren't actively thinking about. But the largest part of your mind is completely unconscious, filled with memories you can't access, feelings you're not aware of, and motivations you don't recognize. This unconscious system processes information, makes decisions, and drives behavior without your conscious mind ever knowing it's happening. Think about falling in love. Did you consciously decide to be attracted to your partner based on logical analysis of their qualities? Or did you feel an immediate, inexplicable pull that seemed to come from nowhere? That attraction came from your unconscious mind, which was instantly comparing your partner to unconscious templates of what love looks like based on your earliest relationships. You felt chemistry, but your unconscious was running a complex pattern-matching algorithm based on childhood experiences you don't even remember. Think about your career choices. Did you rationally analyze all possible professions and select the optimal one for your skills and interests? Or did you find yourself drawn to certain fields, certain roles, certain types of work environments in ways you couldn't fully explain? Your unconscious mind was steering you towards situations that felt familiar, that allowed you to play roles you learned as a child, that recreated family dynamics in professional settings. This unconscious influence extends to everything: the friends you choose, the conflicts you create, the self-sabotaging behaviors you engage in, even the physical symptoms you develop when you're stressed. Your conscious mind experiences all of this as choice, preference, and natural inclination. But your unconscious mind is actually running sophisticated programs based on early learning experiences that shaped how you see yourself, other people, and the world. The disturbing part is how invisible this process is. You don't feel like you're being controlled by unconscious forces. You feel like you're making free choices based on current circumstances and rational considerations. But notice how predictable your patterns are. You keep ending up in similar relationships, similar conflicts, similar self-defeating situations. If you were really making conscious choices, wouldn't there be more variety in your outcomes? The repetition is evidence of unconscious programming, psychological software installed in childhood that keeps running the same programs regardless of changing circumstances. Your conscious mind can want to change, can understand what you should do differently, can make resolutions and plans for new behavior. But if the unconscious programming hasn't changed, you'll keep being pulled back into familiar patterns that feel right even when they're wrong. This is why willpower and conscious effort often fail to create lasting change. You're trying to override unconscious programming with conscious intention, but the unconscious system is much more powerful and operates 24/7, while conscious effort requires constant energy and attention. Understanding this doesn't mean you're powerless to change, but it does mean that lasting change requires working with your unconscious patterns rather than just trying to consciously override them. Part 3. The defense mechanisms that are ruining your relationships. Here's where Freud gets really uncomfortable. Your mind has developed sophisticated ways to protect you from psychological pain, but these same protective mechanisms are systematically destroying your ability to have authentic, intimate relationships as an adult. Freud identified defense mechanisms, unconscious strategies your mind uses to avoid awareness of thoughts, feelings, or realities that feel too threatening to face directly. These mechanisms develop in childhood to help you survive difficult emotional situations, but they persist into adulthood, where they create the very problems they were designed to prevent. Denial is refusing to acknowledge reality when it's too painful to accept. The child whose parent is an alcoholic learns to pretend everything is normal because facing the truth feels too overwhelming. As an adult, they continue to minimize problems, make excuses for partners' bad behavior, and avoid confronting issues that need to be addressed. You probably know someone who's in an obviously dysfunctional relationship, but insists everything is fine. They're not lying to you. They're using denial to protect themselves from awareness they're not ready to handle. Projection is attributing your own unacceptable thoughts or feelings to other people. The child who learns that anger is dangerous unconsciously projects their anger onto others, experiencing the world as full of angry, threatening people while seeing themselves as innocent victims. As an adult, they accuse partners of being angry when they're the ones who are angry, blame others for problems they create, and consistently see their own worst qualities in everyone around them while remaining blind to those qualities in themselves. Rationalization is creating logical-sounding explanations for behavior that's actually driven by unconscious emotional needs. The child who learns to be hyper-responsible to earn love grows up making elaborate rational arguments for why they need to control everything and everyone, while being completely unaware that they're desperately trying to recreate the conditional love they experienced as a child. Displacement is redirecting emotions from their actual target to a safer target. The child who can't express anger at an abusive parent redirects that anger towards siblings, peers, or themselves. As an adult, they blow up at waiters, subordinates, or partners when they're actually angry at authority figures they're afraid to confront. Regression is reverting to earlier developmental behaviors when stressed. The child who learns that being helpless gets them attention and care unconsciously returns to helpless behavior whenever adult life becomes challenging, creating relationship dynamics where they're taken care of rather than taking responsibility. These defense mechanisms feel protective because they shield you from psychological pain in the short term. But they create massive problems in adult relationships because they prevent you from seeing reality clearly, taking responsibility for your behavior, or connecting authentically with other people. Your partner can't have a real relationship with someone who denies problems, projects their issues onto you, rationalizes destructive behavior, displaces anger inappropriately, or regresses into childlike helplessness when things get difficult. But you can't just decide to stop using defense mechanisms because they operate unconsciously and feel necessary for your psychological survival. Trying to eliminate them through willpower usually just activates them more strongly. The key is becoming aware of your specific defense patterns and understanding what childhood wounds they're protecting. Once you understand what you're defending against, you can start to heal those underlying wounds rather than just managing their symptoms. Part 4. The repetition, compulsion that keeps you stuck. Here's Freud's most disturbing discovery. You have an unconscious drive to recreate traumatic experiences from your childhood, even when you consciously want to avoid them, because your mind is trying to master unresolved psychological conflicts by replaying them over and over. He called this repetition compulsion, the tendency to unconsciously arrange your adult life so that you experience the same dynamics, roles, and emotional states you experienced as a child, particularly the painful ones. This isn't masochism or stupidity. It's your unconscious mind's attempt to heal old wounds by creating opportunities to have different outcomes this time. But instead of healing, you usually just re-traumatize yourself by recreating the same situations with the same results. Think about your relationship patterns. Do you keep dating people who are emotionally unavailable, just like one of your parents was? Do you find yourself in relationships where you're trying to earn love, prove your worth, or change someone who doesn't want to change? Your conscious mind probably hates these patterns and swears you'll never repeat them. But your unconscious mind is drawn to them because they feel familiar. And familiarity feels like home, even when home was dysfunctional. The person whose parent was an alcoholic often marries an alcoholic. The person who was abandoned as a child often chooses partners who are likely to abandon them. The person who was criticized constantly often seeks relationships where they'll be criticized. This isn't coincidence, it's repetition compulsion. Your unconscious mind is trying to recreate the original traumatic situation so you can finally master it, finally get the love you needed, finally prove you're worthy of better treatment. But here's the tragic part. You usually choose people who are incapable of giving you what you needed as a child. The emotionally unavailable partner can't suddenly become emotionally available just because you need them to. The critical partner can't suddenly become supportive just because you're trying harder. You end up in adult relationships trying to solve childhood problems with people who have the same limitations as the people who hurt you in the first place. This pattern extends beyond romantic relationships. You might unconsciously choose jobs where you'll be undervalued, the way you were undervalued as a child. You might create friendships where you give more than you receive, recreating childhood dynamics where your needs weren't prioritized. You might sabotage success just when things are going well, because success doesn't feel familiar and your unconscious mind associates unfamiliarity with danger. The repetition compulsion explains why insight alone isn't enough to change these patterns. You can understand intellectually that you're recreating childhood dynamics, but understanding doesn't eliminate the unconscious drive to keep recreating them. Your unconscious mind doesn't care about your conscious preferences or rational analysis. It cares about psychological familiarity and the hope of finally resolving old wounds through new relationships. Breaking free from repetition compulsion requires more than just choosing different people or situations. It requires healing the underlying wounds that are driving the compulsion to repeat. This means feeling the original pain you've been trying to avoid, grieving the childhood you didn't have, and accepting that some wounds can't be healed by recreating the situations that caused them. Only when you stop trying to use adult relationships to fix childhood problems, it's when you can really start having adult relationships that serve your current needs rather than your historical wounds. Part 5. The Oedipus complex that's still controlling your love life. Here's where Freud gets really uncomfortable. He believed that your romantic relationships are unconsciously based on templates established through your relationships with your parents, and that you're still trying to work out unresolved childhood desires and conflicts through your adult partnerships. The Oedipus complex isn't just about children wanting to marry their opposite-sex parent. It's about how your first experiences of love, competition, jealousy, and desire get encoded in your unconscious mind and continue to influence your romantic choices throughout your life. Think about your romantic history. Are you attracted to people who remind you of one of your parents in terms of personality, behavior patterns, or emotional availability? Do you find yourself playing familiar roles, the rescuer, the rebel, the pleaser, the competitor, that echo dynamics from your family of origin? Your unconscious mind learned about love by watching and experiencing your parents' relationship with each other and with you. Those early templates become the blueprint for what love feels like, looks like, and how it's supposed to work. If your parents had a conflicted, dramatic relationship, you might unconsciously seek drama in your own relationships because calm, stable love doesn't feel real or exciting. If one parent was emotionally distant, you might be attracted to emotionally unavailable partners because that's what love looked like in your formative years. If you had to compete for attention or approval as a child, you might unconsciously choose partners who make you compete for their love, either with other people, their work, their hobbies, or their own emotional unavailability. The Oedipal template also explains why some people are attracted to much older partners, why others rebel against partners who remind them of controlling parents, or why some people become involved in triangulated relationships that recreate family dynamics. You're not consciously trying to date your parent or recreate your childhood family structure, but your unconscious mind is using those early relationship templates to evaluate potential partners and guide your romantic choices. This happens even when you consciously reject your parents' relationship model. The person who swears they'll never have a marriage like their parents often ends up in a relationship that's dysfunctional in the opposite way, avoiding their parents' specific problems while creating different problems that serve the same psychological functions. The Oedipal influence also affects how you handle conflict, intimacy, commitment, and power dynamics in relationships. If you learned that love involves jealousy, control, sacrifice, or emotional drama, those elements will feel necessary for a relationship to feel real and meaningful. If you learned that love is conditional, earned through performance, or requires you to suppress parts of yourself, you'll unconsciously choose partners and create dynamics that reinforce those beliefs. Breaking free from Oedipal patterns requires conscious awareness, of how your parents' relationship is still influencing your romantic choices. You need to identify what you learned about love as a child and consciously choose whether those lessons serve your adult relationships. This doesn't mean rejecting everything about your parents or their relationship. It means becoming conscious of the templates they provided and making deliberate choices about which patterns to continue and which ones to change. The goal is to love as an adult based on adult needs and conscious choices, rather than as a child trying to resolve unfinished business through romantic partners who can't give you what your parents didn't provide. Part 6. The transference that's sabotaging your success. Here's a Freudian concept that explains why you keep having the same problems with different bosses, different friends, and different authority figures. Transference. The unconscious tendency to project feelings and expectations from past relationships onto current relationships. You don't just see your boss as your boss. Your unconscious mind sees them through the lens of every authority figure you've ever encountered, starting with your parents. You don't just interact with them based on current circumstances. You react to them based on unconscious expectations formed in childhood. If your father was critical and demanding, you might unconsciously expect every male authority figure to be critical and demanding. You'll interpret neutral feedback as harsh criticism, reasonable requests as impossible demands, and professional guidance as personal attacks. If your mother was controlling and intrusive, you might unconsciously rebel against female supervisors who are just trying to manage projects effectively. You'll experience normal oversight as micromanagement and reasonable boundaries as attempts to control you. This transference happens automatically, without your conscious awareness. You think you're responding to your current boss's actual behavior, but you're actually responding to a composite of every authority figure who's ever triggered your childhood wounds. The same process happens in friendships, romantic relationships, and any situation where you're interacting with people who remind your unconscious mind of significant figures from your past. You meet someone new, but your unconscious mind immediately categorizes them based on who they remind you of. The parent who abandoned you, the sibling who competed with you, the teacher who humiliated you, the friend who betrayed you. Then you interact with them as if they're that person from your past, projecting expectations and emotions that have nothing to do with the current relationship. This is why you might instantly dislike someone you've just met, feel attracted to someone who's obviously wrong for you, or have intense emotional reactions to people who haven't actually done anything to deserve those reactions. Your conscious mind experiences these reactions as intuition, chemistry, or natural preferences. But they're often just transference, your unconscious mind overlaying past relationship templates onto present relationship opportunities. Transference becomes particularly problematic in professional settings, where success often depends on your ability to manage relationships with authority figures, colleagues, and subordinates effectively. If you're unconsciously afraid of authority based on childhood experiences with harsh parents, you might sabotage relationships with bosses who could actually help your career. If you're unconsciously competing with peers based on sibling rivalry, you might create unnecessary conflicts with colleagues who could be valuable allies. If you're unconsciously seeking parental approval from supervisors, you might become inappropriately dependent on their validation rather than developing professional confidence and autonomy. The key to managing transference is recognizing when your emotional reactions to people seem disproportionate to your actual experience with them. Strong immediate likes or dislikes, intense emotional responses to minor interactions, or persistent relationship patterns that repeat across different people and contexts are often signs that transference is operating. Once you recognize transference, you can start to separate your historical emotions from your current relationships. You can ask yourself, am I responding to this person based on who they actually are and what they've actually done, or am I responding to them as if they're someone from my past? This awareness doesn't eliminate transference. It's too deeply embedded in unconscious processing for that. But it can help you make more conscious choices about how to respond to people, rather than just reacting automatically based on unconscious associations. Part 7. Breaking free from your psychological programming. After all this exploration of unconscious control, childhood programming, and repetitive patterns, you're probably wondering, so how do I break free from these unconscious influences and start making conscious choices about my life? Freud's answer was psychoanalysis, the process of making the unconscious conscious through intensive exploration of dreams, free association, and the therapeutic relationship. But even if you're not going to spend years on a therapist's couch, you can use Freudian insights to gain more conscious control over your psychological patterns. First, start noticing your patterns rather than just living them. Most people are so embedded in their unconscious programming that they don't recognize it as programming. They experience it as natural preferences and inevitable circumstances. Begin paying attention to repetitive themes in your relationships, career choices, conflicts, and self-defeating behaviors. Ask yourself, where have I seen this pattern before? What does this remind me of from my childhood or family relationships? Second, identify your specific defense mechanisms and what they're protecting you from. Everyone uses defense mechanisms, but they become problematic when they're unconscious and automatic, rather than conscious and chosen. Notice when you deny problems, project your issues onto others, rationalize destructive behavior, displace emotions inappropriately, or regress into childlike patterns. Ask, what am I afraid would happen if I didn't use this defense mechanism? What childhood experience taught me this was necessary? Third, explore your transference patterns in current relationships. Pay attention to intense, immediate reactions to new people, recurring relationship dynamics, and emotional responses that seem disproportionate to actual events. Ask, who does this person remind me of? What expectations am I bringing to this relationship based on past experiences? How might I be seeing this person through the lens of old wounds rather than current reality? Fourth, examine your repetition compulsion, the situations you keep recreating despite consciously wanting different outcomes. Look for patterns in your romantic relationships, career choices, friendships, and life circumstances. Ask, what childhood wounds am I still trying to heal through these adult situations? What would it mean to accept that these wounds can't be healed by recreating the situations that caused them? Fifth, work on healing the underlying wounds rather than just managing their symptoms. This often requires feeling emotions you've been avoiding, grieving losses you haven't acknowledged, and accepting realities you've been denying. It might mean finally feeling the anger you've been suppressing, the sadness you've been avoiding, or the fear you've been defending against. This emotional work is often painful, but it's the only way to reduce the unconscious drive to keep recreating familiar patterns. Finally, practice making conscious choices rather than just following unconscious impulses. This doesn't mean ignoring your emotions or trying to be completely rational. It means creating space between impulse and action so you can choose responses that serve your current adult needs rather than your historical childhood wounds. The goal isn't to eliminate your unconscious mind. That's impossible and would eliminate creativity, intuition, and emotional depth. The goal is to develop a more conscious relationship with your unconscious patterns so they serve you rather than control you. This is slow work that happens over years rather than weeks. Your childhood programming was installed over many years through repeated experiences, and changing it requires patience, self-compassion, and often professional support. But understanding how your unconscious mind works is the first step toward freedom from patterns that no longer serve you. You can't change programming you don't recognize, but once you see the patterns clearly, you can start making different choices. If this exploration of unconscious influences has made you uncomfortable about how much of your behavior is actually controlled by childhood experiences, That discomfort is the beginning of consciousness. And consciousness is the beginning of choice. Next week, we're exploring Goffman's dramaturgy theory and why everyone around you feels like they're performing fake versions of themselves, because they are. Subscribe now, because understanding social performance might explain why authentic connection feels so rare and difficult to find. Your journey towards psychological freedom is just beginning, and Freud's insights are your guide to understanding the unconscious forces that have been shaping your life since before you could walk.